Before we dive into this story, if you enjoy real park ranger horror experiences, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support helps us bring you more true stories from rangers who've encountered the unexplainable in America's wilderness. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and if you've ever been to the Everglades, share your experience below. My name is Oscar Cook, and I've been a park ranger with Everglades National Park for 12 years. I grew up in South Florida, spent my whole life around water and wildlife. Thought I knew every danger this place could throw at me. Alligators, pythons, hurricanes, drug smugglers using the backcountry as a corridor, tourists doing stupid things that should get them killed, but somehow don't. I thought I'd seen it all. I was wrong. What happened in the 10,000 Islands during the summer of 2003 taught me that the Everglades keep secrets that go deeper than any sinkhole, darker than any mangrove tunnel. It started on June 17th, a Tuesday. I remember because it was my daughter's 8th birthday, and I'd promised to be home early to take her to that pizza place she loved in Homestead. The temperature was pushing 95 degrees by 10 a.m., humidity making it feel like you were breathing through a wet towel. Just another summer day in South Florida. I was doing paperwork at the Flamingo Ranger Station when the call came in. Flamingo sits at the southern tip of the park, as far from civilization as you can get while still having electricity and running water. It's a lonely outpost, surrounded by Florida Bay to the south and endless sawgrass prairie to the north. The nearest town, Homestead, is 38 miles away on a single 2-lane road through the wilderness. The voice on the radio was Maria Calderon, one of our rangers stationed up at Gulf Coast. Her voice had an edge to it that immediately put me on alert. "Cook, we've got a situation. Research team from University of Miami missed their check-in. They were doing water quality sampling in the 10,000 Islands. Last contact was yesterday at 1600 hours. How late are they?" I asked, already standing up and grabbing my gear. Marine research teams were usually pretty good about their check-ins, especially in the backcountry where things could go wrong fast. 22 hours. And Oscar, their GPS beacon isn't responding. Last known position was near Lostman's River. That made my stomach tighten. Lostman's River runs through some of the most isolated territory in the park. Miles and miles of mangrove islands and narrow channels where you could get lost even with GPS. The name wasn't just colorful, it was a warning. "I'm en route. Get aerial support if you can. We might need to cover a lot of water. Already requested. Coast Guard is sending a helicopter, but they can't be here until 1400. Weather front coming in from the Gulf." I loaded my gear into my patrol boat, a 22-foot center console with a shallow draft perfect for navigating the maze of channels in the 10,000 Islands. Extra fuel, first aid kit, emergency radio, flares, water, and my service weapon. You never knew what you'd find out there. Sometimes, the most dangerous predator in the Everglades walks on 2 legs. The run from Flamingo to Lostman's River is about 20 nautical miles through some of the most beautiful and desolate water in the world. The 10,000 Islands aren't actually islands in the traditional sense. They're mangrove forests growing on small mounds of sand and shell, creating a labyrinth of water channels that change with every tide. The channels twist and turn, branch and dead end, forming a maze that's swallowed more than one overconfident boater. I pushed the boat hard, keeping to the main channel markers as much as possible. The tide was going out, exposing mudflats and oyster bars that could rip the bottom out of your hull if you weren't careful. The mangroves on either side formed solid green walls 10 to 20 feet high, their roots creating cathedral-like archways over the narrower passages. It took me nearly 2 hours to reach the area where the research team's last GPS signal had been recorded. The channel here was maybe 30 feet wide, mangroves pressing in from both sides. The water had that tea-colored opacity that comes from tannins leaching out of the vegetation. You couldn't see more than a few inches beneath the surface. Anything could be down there and you'd never know until it was too late. I cut the engine and let the boat drift, listening. The Everglades is never truly silent. There's always the buzz of insects, the cry of birds, the splash of fish jumping. But this place felt wrong somehow. The sounds were there but muted, like someone had turned down the volume on the world. That's when I saw the first boat. It was an aluminum John boat, maybe 14 feet long, the kind the research team would use for shallow water work. It was tied to a mangrove root, bobbing gently in the current. I pulled alongside it and my heart sank. The boat was a mess. Equipment scattered everywhere, water quality testing gear still plugged in and running off a portable battery, backpacks, water bottles, a clipboard with waterlogged data sheets, but no people. I keyed my radio. "Maria, I've found one of their boats. No sign of the team. Looks like they left in a hurry." "Copy that. What's the condition of the vessel?" "Intact. Engine's off, but there's no damage. All their gear is still here. GPS unit is still recording." I climbed into the John boat, carefully searching through the equipment. The GPS unit showed their last recorded waypoints, a series of sampling sites along this stretch of the Lostman's River. They'd been working methodically upstream, taking water samples every few hundred yards. The last waypoint was time-stamped at 15:47 the previous day, just 13 minutes before their final radio check-in. But there was something else. Scratched into the aluminum hull near the bow were numbers. Not written with a marker or pen, but actually gouged into the metal like someone had used a key or knife. The scratches were fresh, bright metal showing through the oxidized surface. 25.3117, negative 81.0945 coordinates. Someone had scratched GPS coordinates into the hull. I punched them into my handheld GPS unit. The coordinates were about 2 miles southwest of our current position, deeper into the maze of islands. "Maria, I've got coordinates carved into the boat. Looks fresh. I'm going to check it out." "Negative, Cook. Wait for backup. Coast Guard ETA is still 90 minutes out. These people could be injured or in danger. I'm not waiting 90 minutes. I'll keep my radio on. If I don't check in every 15 minutes, send everyone." There was a pause, then Maria's voice came back resigned. "Copy that. Be careful out there, Oscar." I transferred some emergency supplies to my patrol boat and started heading toward the coordinates. The channel grew narrower as I went, the mangroves closing in until I was navigating passages that were barely wider than my boat. The tide was still dropping, and I could hear the soft grinding of mud under my hull. If I went much further, I'd be stuck here until the tide came back in 6 hours. The coordinates led me to a spot where 3 channels came together, forming a small open area maybe 50 feet across. In the center of this space was something I'd never seen before in 12 years of working the Everglades, a wooden structure. It looked ancient, built from mangrove wood that had turned silver gray with age. Posts driven into the muddy bottom, supporting a platform about 6 feet above the waterline. The platform was maybe 10 feet square, with the remnants of what might have been a thatched roof. The whole structure leaned at an angle, slowly collapsing into the water. I approached carefully, scanning the mangroves around me for any sign of the research team. The water here was deeper, the current stronger. This close to the Gulf, you could feel the tide pulling. That's when I saw them. 2 figures on the platform. My heart jumped into my throat as I gunned the engine, closing the distance in seconds. I threw the boat into neutral and grabbed my first aid kit. "Dr. Haley Kravitz and Tom Hopkins, we need to get you to a hospital." But as I got closer, I realized something was very wrong. They were sitting on the platform, backs against the remnants of the roof support, facing each other. They weren't moving, weren't responding to my shouts, just sitting there in the blazing heat, in full sun, completely still. I tied my boat to one of the platform supports and climbed up. The wood was spongy under my feet, rotted through in places. I could see holes where the structure was slowly being eaten away by marine borers. Haley Kravitz was a marine biologist I'd met several times before. She was in her early 30s, brilliant, passionate about Everglades conservation. Tom Hopkins was her graduate student, maybe 25, eager and enthusiastic. They'd been coming out here for 3 years running water quality studies. Now they sat motionless on this ancient platform, eyes open but unseeing, skin bright red with sunburn. They were alive, I could see them breathing, but they were completely unresponsive. Their lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration. They'd been out here for at least 20 hours in this heat with no water. "Haley," I said, kneeling in front of her and checking her pulse. It was rapid but steady. "Tom, can you hear me?" Nothing. Their eyes didn't track my movement. They just stared straight ahead at each other, expressions blank. I grabbed my radio. "Maria, I've found 2 members of the research team. They're alive but unresponsive. Possible severe dehydration and heat stroke. I need medical evacuation immediately. Coast Guard is en route to your position. ETA 20 minutes. What's their condition?" "Unconscious, but breathing. They're badly sunburned. Maria, there's something wrong here. They're just sitting here like statues. It's like they're in some kind of trance. Get them hydrated and in the shade if you can. Help is coming." I tried to move Haley into my boat, but as soon as I touched her shoulders, she began to speak. Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, but the words were clear. "Don't go down. Don't go down to where it waits. The water remembers. The water always remembers." "Haley," I said, trying to get her to focus on me, "can you tell me what happened?" But she just kept repeating the same phrases, over and over. "Don't go down. The water remembers. Don't go down." Tom started speaking too, his voice just as detached and monotone. We saw it below. It's been there so long in the dark, it wants to come up." A chill ran down my spine despite the oppressive heat. I managed to get both of them into my boat and covered them with a tarp to shade them from the sun. I poured small amounts of water into their mouths, though they didn't seem to notice or respond. While I waited for the Coast Guard, I searched the platform more carefully. There were marks carved into the wood, symbols that looked old, weathered by decades of sun and salt. They reminded me of the Calusa petroglyphs I'd seen in museums, the work of the indigenous people who'd lived in southwest Florida thousands of years before Europeans arrived. But there was also something newer. Scratched into one of the support posts, just above the waterline, were more coordinates. And below the coordinates, 3 words carved in rough letters. "Third time charm." The Coast Guard helicopter arrived 23 minutes later, the thump of its rotors echoing off the mangroves. They lowered a rescue basket, and we loaded Haley and Tom, still unresponsive, still muttering their cryptic warnings. The medic gave them IVs and checked their vitals before they were hoisted up. "You coming with us?" the medic shouted over the rotor noise. "No, I've got to find the rest of the team. There were 4 people out here." The medic nodded and gave a thumbs up. "They're going to Jackson Memorial in Miami. If you find the others, call it in." The helicopter lifted away, its rotor wash creating small whitecaps on the water. As the sound faded, I was left alone in the maze of mangroves, the silence pressing in like a physical weight. I looked at the new coordinates I'd found carved into the platform. Punching them into my GPS, I saw they were even deeper into the 10,000 islands, in an area I'd rarely patrolled. The map showed it as open water, but I knew that didn't mean much. The Everglades was constantly changing, new islands forming, old channels silting in. I should have waited for backup. That was protocol. But I kept thinking about the other 2 researchers out there somewhere, possibly in the same condition as Haley and Tom, or worse. Every minute counted. The tide had turned and was coming back in, giving me a few more feet of water to work with. I started toward the coordinates, navigating by GPS since there were no channel markers this far into the wilderness. The mangroves here were old growth, their trunks thick and gnarled, roots forming complex tangles that made some passages impassable. After 30 minutes of careful navigation, I reached a point where my GPS said I was close to the coordinates, but all I could see was mangroves. Dense, impenetrable walls of vegetation. No open water, no platform. Nothing. I circled the area slowly, searching for any kind of opening. Then I saw it. A narrow channel, barely wider than my boat, cutting through the mangroves at an angle that was almost invisible until you were right on top of it. The entrance was partially blocked by fallen branches, but I could see it opened up beyond. I had to use a machete to clear enough branches to squeeze through. The channel was so narrow that mangrove roots scraped both sides of my boat as I idled forward. Sunlight barely penetrated the canopy here, the overhanging branches creating a tunnel of green shadow. The channel opened into a small bay, maybe 100 feet across, completely enclosed by mangroves. In the center of this hidden space was a boat, the research team's main vessel, a 26-foot Carolina skiff equipped with all their sampling equipment and supplies. The boat was anchored in the middle of the bay, rocking gently in the current. I could see someone sitting in the stern. As I got closer, I recognized Dr. James Morton, the team leader. He was a respected marine ecologist, had been studying the Everglades for over 20 years. "Dr. Morton," I called out. "It's Oscar Cook, park ranger. Are you all right?" He didn't respond. As I pulled alongside, I could see he was in the same condition as Haley and Tom. Sitting upright, eyes open but unfocused, sunburned and dehydrated. The fourth team member, a grad student named Rachel Kim, was slumped in the bow, her condition even worse. I radioed for another medical evacuation and started tending to them as best I could. But as I worked, I became aware of something that made my skin crawl. The water in this enclosed bay was wrong. The rest of the 10,000 islands, the water was in constant motion, flowing with the tide, stirred by wind. But here, in this hidden space, the water was perfectly still, glass smooth, and it was dark, darker than tannin-stained water should be, almost black. I was getting Rachel set up with water when Dr. Morton started speaking. His voice was rough, damaged from hours of sun and dehydration, but the words were clear and deliberate. We went down. We shouldn't have gone down. It showed us things. Things that have been waiting in the dark since before the sea came. It wants to be remembered. It needs to be remembered or it fades. I tried to get him to focus on me, to tell me what happened, but he kept talking in that same monotone, like he was reciting something memorized. Every 10 years it calls. Every 10 years someone goes down to remember. 1983, 1993, 2003. The third time is the charm. The third time it rises. The Coast Guard arrived with a rescue boat this time, unable to land their helicopter in this enclosed space. We loaded Dr. Morton and Rachel Kim, both still muttering incomprehensible warnings about what waited in the water below. The Coast Guard medic shook his head as he examined them. "Heat stroke and dehydration," he said. "But I've never seen anything like this. It's like they're all having the same hallucination." As they left, I stood alone in that hidden bay, looking down at the black water. The sun was starting to set, long shadows stretching across the surface. And as I looked, I could have sworn I saw something move deep below, a pale shape gliding through the darkness like a ghost. I should have left then, should have followed the Coast Guard out of that place, but I kept thinking about what they'd all said. We went down. Every 10 years someone goes down to remember. There was diving equipment on the research boat. Full scuba gear, well maintained. They'd been doing underwater surveys as part of their research. Whatever they'd seen, whatever had put them in that trance-like state, they'd seen it below the surface. The water here was maybe 15 feet deep according to the depth finder. Not particularly deep by diving standards, but looking at that black water, it felt like staring into an abyss. I made a decision that I've regretted every day since. I put on the scuba gear, checked the air tank, and prepared to go down. I told myself I was looking for evidence, trying to understand what had happened to the research team. But the truth was simpler and more foolish. I needed to know what was down there. The water was warmer than I expected, almost body temperature. As I descended, my light cutting a narrow cone through the murk, I could see the bottom was not mud or sand, but something else. Rock. Limestone bedrock covered in a thin layer of sediment and algae. And there was an opening, a crack in the limestone maybe 3 feet wide, leading down into darkness. I could feel current flowing out of it, cool water meeting the warm bay water in a gentle upwelling. This was a spring, probably connected to the vast aquifer system that underlay all of South Florida. I descended to the opening and shined my light inside. The crack opened into a larger chamber, its walls worn smooth by millennia of water flow. I could see something in there, shapes that didn't look natural. Against every instinct screaming at me to surface and get out of there, I squeezed through the opening. The chamber was maybe 20 feet across, the ceiling arching overhead like a dome. The walls were covered in carvings, not modern vandalism, but ancient art, the same kind of petroglyphs I'd seen on the platform. Spirals and figures and symbols that seemed to shift in the beam of my light. In the center of the chamber, resting on the limestone floor, was a structure. It looked like it had been built from mangrove wood and coral, bound together with some kind of rope or vine that had long since petrified. The structure was roughly cylindrical, maybe 4 feet tall and 3 feet in diameter. It was covered in more carvings, more symbols. I swam closer, fascinated and terrified in equal measure. As my light played across the surface of the structure, I saw something that made me gasp, nearly losing my regulator. There were skulls worked into the structure, human skulls, and others I couldn't identify. They'd been placed deliberately, built into the construction like architectural elements. And inside the structure, visible through gaps in the ancient wood and coral, was something else. Something pale and withered that might have once been alive but had been preserved by the cool, constant temperature of the spring water. I couldn't tell what it was, couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. It was organic, that much was clear, but its shape was wrong, its proportions impossible. That's when I heard it. Not a sound exactly, because sound doesn't travel that way underwater. But I felt it, a vibration that seemed to come from the structure itself, from whatever was inside it. And with that vibration came images, flashing through my mind faster than I could process them. I saw people coming to this place over thousands of years. Indigenous peoples performing ceremonies, placing offerings in the spring. I saw the Calusa, the dominant culture of southwest Florida before European contact, making pilgrimages to this site. I saw Spanish missionaries trying to destroy the structure, only to flee in terror when something rose from the water. I saw Seminole people coming here during the wars, seeking guidance from whatever dwelt below. And I saw what they were all trying to appease. Something ancient, something that had lived in the limestone caverns beneath Florida, since before humans walked this land. Something that fed on memory and belief, growing stronger when remembered, fading to near nothingness when forgotten. Every 10 years, someone had to go down and remember, had to see it and carry that memory back to the surface. If they didn't, if it faded completely, it would rise, seeking to make itself remembered in ways that would be catastrophic. 1983, 1993, 2003. Someone had been maintaining the cycle, keeping the thing contained by the act of remembering it. The research team had accidentally fulfilled the ceremony, gone down and seen it, and now they carried that memory even though they didn't understand it. But something was different this time. The structure was damaged, cracked, and crumbling. The thing inside was getting out. I felt it then. The same presence that had trapped Haley and Tom and the others. It reached into my mind with tendrils of memory and need, trying to root itself in my consciousness. I saw what it wanted, what it had always wanted, to be remembered perfectly, to exist fully in human thought, to use that belief as a doorway to escape its ancient prison. I kicked hard, shooting back through the crack in the limestone, my breath coming in ragged gasps through the regulator. Above me, I could see the underside of the research boat silhouetted against the fading daylight. I surfaced gasping, ripping off my mask and sucking in humid air that had never tasted so sweet. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I hauled myself into the boat and sat there shaking, trying to process what I'd seen and felt. My mind felt violated, like something had rummaged through my memories and left traces of itself behind. I needed to get out of this bay, back to the main channels where other people existed, where the modern world could crowd out the ancient wrongness of this place. I started the engines of both boats, deciding to tow the research vessel back with me rather than leave it overnight. But as I began to navigate out through the narrow channel, I looked back at that smooth black water one last time. And I saw it, just for a moment, barely visible in the dying light. Something pale breaking the surface in the center of the bay. Something that looked almost but not quite human, reaching up as if trying to pull itself out of the depths. I hit the throttle and didn't look back again. I made it back to Flamingo just after dark, towing the research vessel behind my patrol boat. Maria was waiting at the dock with 2 other rangers and a representative from the University of Miami. The look on my face must have told them something was wrong because they didn't ask questions, just helped me secure the boats and walked me to the ranger station. "I need to make some calls," I said, my hands still shaking slightly. "And I need access to the park archives, historical records going back as far as we have them." "Oscar, what happened out there?" Maria asked. "The Coast Guard said you looked like you'd seen a ghost when you came back." I sat down heavily in one of the office chairs. The research team, they didn't just get heat stroke or dehydration. They found something in the water. And I think it's been there a very long time. I spent the next hour on the phone with Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami. The doctors were baffled by the research team's condition. Physically, they were responding to treatment. The dehydration was manageable, the sunburns would heal, but mentally, they remained in that strange, detached state, cycling through the same phrases over and over. The doctors were talking about transferring them to a psychiatric facility. "Can I speak with them?" I asked. "I need to know exactly what they saw." The doctor on duty was hesitant. "Mr. Cook, they're not really capable of conversation. They're responsive to stimuli, but they don't seem to process questions or engage with reality in any meaningful way." "I understand, but I'm coming up there anyway. This is an ongoing investigation." I drove through the night, the 80 miles from Flamingo to Miami feeling longer than ever. The city lights were a harsh contrast to the darkness of the Everglades, a reminder that 2 very different worlds existed within a few hours of each other. At the hospital, I found the research team in a secure wing, more for their own safety than anything else. Dr. Haley Kravitz was awake, sitting up in bed, her eyes tracking the television on the wall but not really seeing it. When I entered her room, those eyes turned to me. "You went down," she said immediately. "I can see it in you. You saw what we saw. Haley, I need you to tell me everything. What did you find in that spring? What was in the structure?" Her eyes refocused slightly, and for a moment I saw recognition there. The ancient thing. It's been sleeping in the limestone since before the ice came. The first people found it and learned to keep it sleeping. Feed it memory so it doesn't need to feed on anything else. Every 10 years, someone has to remember. Has to see it and know it and carry that knowledge back to the surface. Why every 10 years? Because memory fades. People forget. Stories become legends. Legends become myths. Every 10 years, it begins to wake, begins to hunger. So someone goes down and remembers, keeps the memory alive, and it sleeps again. But something's changed, I said. The structure is breaking down. I saw it. Haley's expression shifted to something like fear. Third time charm. 3 times, 3 times 3, 1983, 1993, 2003. 3 cycles. After 3 cycles, the binding weakens. It's almost free. Before I could ask more questions, a nurse came in and gently informed me that visiting hours were over. As I left, Haley called out one more thing. Check the records. Check 1983. They thought it was an accident. I spent the next day at the South Florida Research Center in Homestead, going through decades of park records. Maria had pulled everything she could find related to incidents in the 10,000 Islands area, and we spread it all out on a conference table like pieces of a puzzle. The pattern was there once you knew to look for it. Every 10 years, something happened in the same general area. Sometimes it was drownings, sometimes disappearances, sometimes just people found wandering the mangroves in a state of confusion. The earliest record we had was from 1953, when a fishing guide and his 2 clients vanished near Lostman's River. Their boat was found days later. The guide sitting in it alive but unable to speak or respond. The clients were never found. Working backward from 2003, 1993, 1983, 1973, 1963, 1953. 5 cycles, and our record suggested it went back even further, into the time before the park was established in 1947. The 1983 incident was particularly well documented. A marine biology research team from Florida State University, studying mangrove ecology. 3 researchers went missing for 2 days in the 10,000 Islands. When they were found, they were in a state similar to what I'd just witnessed with Haley's team, dehydrated, sunburned, but alive. The official report cited heat exhaustion and disorientation. But the notes from the ranger who found them, a man named Robert Hayes, who'd since retired, mentioned strange details. All 3 researchers kept talking about something in the water, something that needed to be remembered. I need to talk to Robert Hayes, I told Maria. He lives in Naples now. I've got his number. I called Hayes that afternoon and explained the situation. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before he spoke. I was hoping I'd never have to think about that case again, but I guess some things don't stay buried, do they? He agreed to meet me the next day at a fishing dock in Everglades City, a small town on the northern edge of the 10,000 Islands. When I arrived, I found a man in his late 60s, weathered by decades of sun and salt, sitting on a bench overlooking the water. I remember every detail of that day in '83, Hayes said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. Found those researchers on a platform that shouldn't have been there. Old Calusa construction, had to be centuries old. They were sitting there like statues, staring at each other. When we got them out, they kept talking about something down in the water. Something that needed to be seen, to be remembered. Did you investigate? Did you dive? Hayes shook his head. I wanted to, but my supervisor at the time, he shut it down. Said it was just heat stroke, that diving would be a waste of resources. The researchers recovered physically after a few days, but mentally. He trailed off. They never came back to the Everglades. All three of them left marine biology entirely. Last I heard, one was working in tech in Silicon Valley. Another became a teacher in Colorado. They ran as far from the water as they could get. And you never went back to that spot? I tried once, about a year later. Couldn't find it. The mangroves had grown, channels had changed. It was like the place had hidden itself. After that, I requested a transfer to a different district. Spent my last 10 years with the park up in Big Cypress, as far from the 10,000 islands as I could get while still doing the job. He looked at me with eyes that had seen something he couldn't explain. You found it again, didn't you? It's been another 10 years. It's calling again. I nodded, and this time the structure is failing. Whatever's down there, it's getting out. Hayes was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the water. You know, there's a Seminole story about this area, about something that lived in the water before the land was the land. The old medicine people used to come out here to perform ceremonies, keeping it bound. But most of that knowledge has been lost. You should talk to Jimmy Osceola. He's one of the few who still knows the old ways. Jimmy Osceola lived on the Mikosiki Reservation, about an hour north of the Everglades. Hayes gave me his contact information, and I made the drive that evening. The reservation sat along the Tamiami Trail, a narrow strip of land between the road and the vast river of sawgrass that was the true heart of the Everglades. Osceola was a man in his 70s, a respected elder and traditional medicine practitioner. When I explained why I'd come, his expression grew grave. "Come inside," he said. "This is not a conversation to have where the wind can hear." In his small house, surrounded by family photos and traditional crafts, Osceola told me a story that had been passed down through generations. Long before the Seminole came to Florida, before even the Calusa ruled these waters, there was something else. A spirit, a being, an entity that existed in the liminal space between water and stone. The first peoples who came to Florida found it, and learned that it could not be destroyed, only contained. They built structures to trap it, performed ceremonies to keep it bound. The binding required memory, Osceola explained. The entity fed on being known, on existing in human consciousness. By going to it regularly, by seeing it and remembering it in a controlled way, the old peoples gave it enough sustenance to keep it from seeking that sustenance elsewhere. But if it was forgotten, if too much time passed without someone remembering, it would begin to wake fully. And when it woke, it would reach out to make itself known in terrible ways. Every 10 years, someone with a strong spirit must go down to the sacred place and bear witness, carry the memory so the entity can sleep. The Calusa did this. Later, when my people came to Florida, we learned from the spirits of this land and continued the tradition. But in recent times, the ceremonies were lost. The young people don't believe, don't understand. So the entity has been calling to those who come close, forcing them to remember whether they understand or not. "Is there a way to strengthen the binding?" I asked. "The structure is breaking down." Osceola shook his head slowly. "The physical structure is just a focus, a marker. The real binding is in memory and belief. 3 cycles ago, the binding began to weaken because those who went down did not do so willingly, did not understand what they were doing. Each time, the entity learned more about the modern world, became better at reaching into human minds. By the 3rd cycle, it is strong enough to break free if it chooses. So what happens now? Now, someone must go down one final time. But not just to witness, to seal the binding properly, to give the entity enough memory that it will sleep for generations. And that person must understand what they are doing, must go willingly knowing the cost. What cost? Osceola looked at me with eyes full of ancient sorrow. The entity does not just take memory, it gives memory in return. It has existed for millennia, has witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the coming and going of ice ages. To properly bind it, you must accept some of those memories into yourself. Carry them always. It is a burden that will change you forever. I left the reservation as the sun was setting, my mind churning with everything I'd learned. The rational part of me, the part trained in law enforcement and evidence-based investigation, wanted to reject it all as superstition and folklore. But I'd seen the structure. I'd felt that presence reaching into my mind. I knew, with a certainty deeper than reason, that Osceola was telling the truth. I was almost back to Homestead when my radio crackled to life. "Cook, this is dispatch. We have a situation. 2 kayakers reported missing in the 10,000 Islands. Last seen this morning near Lostman's River." My blood went cold. It was happening again. The entity was calling. I turned around and headed straight for Flamingo. By the time I arrived, it was full dark. Maria had already organized a search team, but I pulled her aside. "I know where they are," I said. "Or at least I know where they're being drawn to. We need to go now, before they've been out there too long. Oscar, you look like hell. When's the last time you slept?" "I'll sleep when this is over. Get a boat ready. We're going to that bay." We assembled a small team, me, Maria, and 2 other rangers. We loaded up with spotlights, emergency equipment, and more rope than we probably needed. The trip through the mangroves at night was treacherous, the narrow channels difficult to navigate even with GPS and spotlights. Every shadow looked threatening, every sound magnified in the darkness. It took us 3 hours to reach the hidden bay. When we cut our engines and drifted into that enclosed space, our spotlights revealed the 2 kayakers. They were on the ancient platform where I'd found Haley and Tom, sitting in the same position, backs against the rotting supports. They'd been there for maybe 10 hours, and already they were starting to show signs of dehydration. We pulled alongside the platform and I climbed up. The kayakers were a couple in their 30s, tourists from Minnesota. They were in that same trance state, eyes unfocused, lips moving and whispered words I couldn't quite make out. "Maria, get them in the boat. I'm going down." "What? No, Oscar. We need to get these people out of here and call for medical support. I know what's doing this. I know what's down there. And I know that if we don't do something now, it's going to get worse. More people are going to be drawn here. The entity is getting stronger." "Entity? Oscar, listen to yourself." I grabbed her shoulders, making her look at me. "Maria, you've known me for how many years? Have you ever known me to be irrational or prone to fantasy?" She shook her head slowly. "Then trust me now. There is something down there, something ancient and dangerous. And it's breaking free. I can feel it. Every hour that passes, it gets stronger. I have to go down and try to bind it properly before it's too late." Maria looked at the black water, then back at me. "How do you bind something like that?" "I don't know. But I have to try." I suited up while the other rangers loaded the kayakers into our boat. They were lighter than they should have been, as if whatever was happening to them was draining not just water, but substance. Their whispered words became clearer as they were moved. "It's waking. It's waking. It wants to be whole." I entered the water with a heavy spotlight in addition to my standard dive light. The descent to the spring opening felt different this time. The water seemed to resist me, as if it had thickened, or maybe that was just my imagination and fear. The crack in the limestone was wider than it had been 2 days ago. The edges looked freshly broken, as if something had pushed from below. I squeezed through into the chamber and immediately saw that things had changed. The ancient structure in the center was cracked open, the carefully built walls of mangrove and coral split apart. Through the gaps, I could see the thing inside more clearly now. It was pale, almost luminescent in my light. It looked like it might have been alive millions of years ago, something from an age before humans. But it wasn't dead. It moved slowly, pulsing like a heart, and with each pulse I felt that presence in my mind growing stronger. As I watched, mesmerized and terrified, images began to flood my consciousness. Not just images, but memories. Memories that weren't mine. I saw the Everglades as it had been 12,000 years ago, at the end of the Ice Age, when the sea level was 300 feet lower, and this area was dry land. I saw the first humans arriving, following game animals into what would one day be Florida. I saw them finding this entity, already ancient even then, sleeping in the limestone. I saw the Calusa at the height of their power, a thriving civilization built on the bounty of these waters. I saw them maintaining the binding, understanding what they kept contained. I saw Spanish conquistadors dismissing the native warnings as superstition, trying to destroy the sacred sites. I saw Seminole people fleeing the wars in the north, learning from the land itself how to survive, how to keep the old knowledge alive. And I saw what happened when the binding failed, when too much time passed without proper ceremony. Storms that shouldn't happen. Hurricanes that formed impossibly fast. Water rising to swallow entire villages. The entity couldn't leave its prison, but it could influence the water, shape it, use it to remake the world in ways that would force humanity to remember it existed. A message formed in my mind, not in words, but in pure meaning. Remember me fully, or I will make myself unforgettable. I understood then what Osceola had tried to tell me. The entity didn't want freedom, not really. It wanted to exist fully in human consciousness, to be real, in a way it could never be while trapped in stone and water. The binding wasn't a prison, it was a symbiosis. Humans remembered the entity, gave it reality through belief and ceremony. In return, the entity remained contained, its power focused inward rather than out. But the modern world had forgotten. We'd stopped believing in such things, stopped performing the ceremonies, and so the entity had begun reaching out, trying to make itself remembered in the only way it knew how. I reached out to the structure, placing my hand on the cracked wood and coral. The moment I made contact, the flood of memory intensified. I saw thousands of years in seconds. I felt the weight of millennia pressing into my consciousness. It was overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful in its vastness, and I understood what I needed to do. I needed to accept it. Not just witness it, but truly remember it. Carry it with me always. Give it enough reality and human consciousness that it could rest again. I closed my eyes and opened my mind completely. Stopped resisting the flood of memory and let it pour in. I accepted all of it. The age, the power, the alien consciousness that had existed in this place since before my species walked upright. I remembered it all, made it part of myself. The entity pulsed once more, and I felt something shift. The presence in my mind settled, becoming quieter but no less real. It was satisfied, for now, for another cycle at least. When I opened my eyes, the structure had sealed itself. The cracks were gone, the wood and coral whole again, and inside, the pale shape had darkened, becoming less visible. Sleeping once more. I surfaced to find the first light of dawn breaking over the mangroves. Maria was waiting anxiously, her flashlight trained on the water where I'd gone down. When she saw me surface, the relief on her face was palpable. "Is it over?" she asked as I climbed into the boat. For now, but I carried something with me, something I'd carry for the rest of my life. The weight of memory, of knowledge that shouldn't exist in the modern world. I could feel it in my mind, a presence that was now part of me. The kayakers had recovered during the night, their trance broken the moment I'd completed the binding. They had no memory of how they'd gotten to the platform, no memory of the hours they'd spent there. Just a gap in their experience and a nagging feeling they'd forgotten something important. We took them back to the Flamingo, where medics checked them out and found them dehydrated but otherwise healthy. They'd go home to Minnesota with a story about getting lost in the mangroves, a cautionary tale about respecting the wilderness. They'd never know how close they'd come to something far worse. As for me, I wrote my official report carefully. Tourists suffered from heat exposure and disorientation. Researcher team experienced similar symptoms. All victims recovered, case closed. The truth went into a separate file, one that only Maria and I would ever see. But I knew it wasn't truly over. It was never over. Every 10 years, the cycle would repeat. Someone would need to go down and remember. And next time, in 2013, that someone would probably be me. 10 years passed faster than I expected. Life went on, as it always does. My daughter graduated high school and went off to college in Gainesville studying environmental science. My marriage ended, unable to survive the weight of secrets I couldn't share. I stayed with the Park Service, became a supervisor, spent my days dealing with bureaucracy and my nights trying not to think about what waited in the dark water of the 10,000 islands. But I never forgot. How could I? The entity had made sure of that. It lived in my memory like a second consciousness, not controlling me but always present. I'd see it in my dreams, feel it stirring whenever I was near water. And every year, as the calendar approached June, I'd feel it growing restless, anticipating the cycle that was coming. I'd kept track of the other witnesses over the years. Dr. Haley Kravitz had left marine biology, now worked for an environmental nonprofit in Atlanta. She never went near the ocean. Tom Hopkins had become a high school science teacher in Ohio, about as far from the coast as you could get. Dr. Morton had retired early, moved to Arizona. Rachel Kim had disappeared entirely, her family saying she'd gone on a spiritual journey somewhere in Asia and hadn't been heard from in years. They'd all carried some fragment of that memory, even if they didn't fully understand it. The entity had touched them, left its mark. But I was the only one who'd accepted it fully, who'd made the binding. The only one who knew with absolute certainty that June 2013 would bring the next cycle. I requested vacation time for the entire month of June. My superiors thought I was finally taking time to recover from the stress of the job, maybe traveling somewhere to clear my head. Instead, I stayed close to Flamingo, monitoring reports, waiting for the inevitable call. It came on June 15th, 2 days earlier than the 2003 incident. A family of 4 on a guided kayak tour had become separated from their group in the 10,000 islands. When the guide realized they were missing, he'd immediately called it in. Search teams had been looking for 6 hours with no sign of them. The guide, a local man named Tom Ramirez, who'd been running tours for 15 years, was shaken when I interviewed him at the Gulf Coast Ranger Station. "I don't understand it," he said. "We were following a marked route, staying in the main channels." I turned around to point out a roseate spoonbill, and when I looked back, they were gone. Just vanished. They had GPS, radios, everything. But they're not responding to any calls. "Where exactly did you lose them?" He showed me on the map. It was less than 2 miles from where I'd found Haley Kravitz's team 10 years ago. The entity was calling again, drawing people to its prison. "I'll handle this search personally," I told the other rangers. "I know this area better than anyone." That wasn't entirely true. What I knew was the hidden bay, the path that only appeared when the entity wanted to be found, and I knew that's exactly where the family would be. I went alone. Protocol said I should take backup, but I couldn't risk anyone else being exposed to the entity. Maria had retired 2 years ago, moved back to her hometown in New Mexico. She'd been having nightmares about the water, she'd told me before she left. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that black surface and something pale moving beneath it. The route to the hidden bay was exactly as I remembered. The narrow channel through the mangroves, the overhanging branches that made it feel like navigating through a tunnel. Even the light seemed dimmer here, the sun struggling to penetrate the canopy. The bay was unchanged, still enclosed by mangroves, still unnaturally calm. And there, on the ancient platform, sat the family. Mother, father, 2 teenagers. They'd arranged themselves in a circle, facing inward, hands clasped together. Their eyes were open but unfocused, their lips moving in synchronized whispers. I tied my boat to the platform and climbed up. The wood felt even more rotten than it had 10 years ago, threatening to collapse under my weight. As I approached the family, I could hear what they were whispering. It's time, third time, third time, third time, it's time to wake. My blood went cold. This wasn't the same message as before. Something had changed. I tried to rouse them, calling their names, gently shaking their shoulders. But they were locked in that trance, completely unresponsive. Unlike the previous victims, they didn't speak directly to me, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. They just kept repeating that phrase, "It's time to wake." I had to go down. That's what I'd prepared for. What I'd known would be necessary. But as I looked at the black water, I felt a fear deeper than anything I'd experienced 10 years ago. Something was different. The entity felt different, stronger, more present. I suited up and entered the water, my dive lights cutting through the murk. The descent felt longer this time, as if the spring had deepened. When I reached the crack in the limestone, I saw immediately that my fears were justified. The opening had widened significantly. What had been a tight squeeze 10 years ago was now large enough for 2 people to swim through side by side. The edges looked freshly broken. Limestone that had been solid for millennia now crumbling away. Inside the chamber, the changes were even more dramatic. The structure that had contained the entity was showing signs of serious decay. Large sections had collapsed, revealing more of the pale shape inside. And that shape had grown. It was at least twice the size I remembered, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to match the current flowing through the spring. I felt the entity's presence immediately, reaching into my mind with familiar tendrils. But this time it felt different. Not the cautious touch of something trying to communicate, but the aggressive push of something trying to break free. Images flooded my consciousness, but they weren't the historical memories I'd experienced before. These were projections, visions of possible futures. I saw the Everglades flooded, water rising to swallow Miami, Fort Myers, Naples. I saw hurricanes forming one after another, an endless procession of storms. I saw the Gulf of Mexico becoming a dead zone, its waters turned dark and sterile, and I understood. The entity wasn't just trying to make itself remembered anymore. It was preparing to act, to reshape the world in ways that would make forgetting impossible. I tried to communicate, to reinforce the binding as I had 10 years ago. I opened my mind, offered my memory as a vessel. But instead of settling into that familiar presence in my consciousness, the entity pushed harder, trying to force more of itself into me than I could hold. The pressure was overwhelming. I could feel my sense of self beginning to fragment under the weight of too much alien memory. Images from eons ago, from ages before humans, flooded my mind faster than I could process them. I saw the Earth when the continents were arranged differently, when the climate was alien to anything modern humans had experienced. I saw other entities like this one, sleeping in caves and deep water all across the planet, waiting. I realized with horror that this wasn't an isolated phenomenon. The thing in the Everglades was one of many, part of a network of ancient consciousness spread across the world. And they were all waking up. I tried to pull back, to break the connection, but the entity held on. It had been patient for so long, contained for millennia. But 3 cycles of improper binding had weakened the structure, and now it saw an opportunity. It could force enough of itself into my consciousness to create an anchor in the human world, a way to project its influence beyond the confines of the spring. I felt myself starting to drown, not in water, but in memory and consciousness that wasn't mine. My own identity was being pushed aside, buried under the weight of something too vast to comprehend. This was how it would escape, not by physically leaving the spring, but by living through me, using my body and mind as a bridge between its world and ours. I was losing myself. In another moment, I would be gone entirely, replaced by something wearing my face and carrying my memories, but fundamentally other. Then I heard a voice, muffled by water but distinct. It was calling my name. Oscar, Oscar Cook, come back. I recognized that voice. Maria. But that was impossible. Maria was in New Mexico. She'd left the Everglades years ago. The voice came again, more insistent. Oscar, fight it. Remember who you are. Remember your daughter. Remember your life. My daughter. Her name was Elena. She was 20, studying to be a marine biologist despite my subtle attempts to steer her toward something, anything, that would keep her away from water. She had her mother's eyes and my stubborn refusal to quit. I grabbed onto that thought, that memory of Elena, and used it as an anchor. I focused on every detail I could remember. Her first steps, her first day of school, teaching her to identify birds in the mangroves. My memories, my life, my identity. The entity's grip loosened slightly. Not much, but enough. Enough for me to pull back, to create a small space between its consciousness and mine. I kicked hard, shooting up through the crack in the limestone, breaking the connection. I surfaced, gasping, ripping off my mask. Maria's face swam into view above me, worried and determined. She was in a boat next to mine, reaching down to help me up. "How did you know to come back?" I managed to gasp out as she hauled me aboard. "I dreamed about it," she said. "Every night for the last month, I've been dreaming about this place. About you going down alone." I tried to ignore it, told myself I was being paranoid. But 3 days ago, the dreams got worse. I saw you drowning, not in water, but in something else. I got on a plane yesterday and drove straight here. "The family," I said, looking at the platform. "We need to get them out of here." But the family wasn't whispering anymore. They were sitting up straight, looking around with confused expressions. The moment I'd broken free of the entity's attempt to possess me, it had released its hold on them as well. We loaded them into the boats and started the long journey back to Flamingo. They were disoriented and dehydrated but otherwise unharmed. They remembered nothing after entering the mangroves that morning. No memory of being called to the hidden bay or sitting on the platform for hours. As we navigated through the narrow channels, Maria and I talked in low voices, not wanting the family to hear. "It's getting worse," I said. 10 years ago, it was trying to maintain the binding, to work within the old ceremonies. Now it's trying to break free entirely. Maria nodded. "I've been researching," she said, "calling in favors, talking to people who study this kind of thing. There's a professor at University of Florida, Dr. James Whitfield, who specializes in Native American history and mythology. He thinks there are multiple sites like this across the Southeast, places where ancient entities were bound by indigenous ceremonies. And all of them are showing signs of instability. Because the ceremonies stopped," I said. "The knowledge was lost or suppressed." "Exactly. But Whitfield thinks there might be a way to strengthen the bindings, to buy time. It involves reconstructing the old ceremonies as accurately as possible, combining indigenous knowledge with modern understanding. I thought about the structure crumbling in that underwater chamber, about the entity's growing power. Would buying time be enough? Or were we just delaying the inevitable? We reached Flamingo just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that seemed ominous rather than beautiful. The family was taken to the medical center, where they'd be evaluated and observed overnight. In my office, Maria spread out maps and research papers, showing me what she'd learned. Whitfield has identified at least 7 major binding sites in Florida alone, she said. Most are in springs or sinkholes, places where the aquifer meets the surface. The entities live in the limestone, in the vast network of caves beneath the state. They're water beings, or maybe it's more accurate to say they're time beings that exist in the slow flow of underground rivers. If we can't maintain the individual bindings, what happens? According to Whitfield, the entities will begin to act independently, trying to remake their environments in ways that maximize human attention and memory. Natural disasters, unexplained phenomena, anything that makes people talk and wonder and remember. And if enough of them wake up at once, the cumulative effect could be catastrophic. So, what's Whitfield's solution? A ceremony at the summer solstice 3 days from now. He's gathered representatives from different tribes, people who still know fragments of the old ways. They're willing to try to perform a coordinated binding ceremony at multiple sites simultaneously. But he needs someone who's actually interacted with one of the entities. Someone who understands what they're dealing with. He needs me, I said. And me, Maria added. I touched it too, even if not as deeply as you. We both carry its memory. I looked at the map she'd spread out. The 7 sites formed a rough pattern across the state, from the Everglades in the south to springs in North Florida. Ginny Springs, Devil's Den, Troy Spring, and others I'd heard of but never visited. 3 days to prepare for a ceremony we don't fully understand, attempting to bind entities we barely comprehend. What could go wrong? Maria smiled grimly. Everything. But what choice do we have? We spent those 3 days in a blur of preparation. Dr. Whitfield arrived with 3 indigenous elders, 2 Seminole and 1 Miccosukee, who'd preserved fragments of the old ceremonies. They taught us songs and languages that predated European contact, showed us how to prepare offerings, explained the mental state required to properly bind an entity without being consumed by it. The key, Whitfield explained, was balance. The entities needed to be remembered, to exist in human consciousness. But that memory had to be controlled, structured, intentional, like a photograph that captures a moment without letting that moment consume the present. On the morning of June 18th, we split into teams and headed to the 7 sites. I was assigned to the hidden bay in the 10,000 Islands, the entity I knew best. Maria went to Devil's Den, a spring near Williston. The others spread out to cover the remaining sites. The ceremony was to be performed simultaneously at all 7 locations, timed to coincide with the moment of the summer solstice at 1:04 p.m. Eastern Time. The elders believed that the astronomical alignment would strengthen the binding, providing a natural framework for the ceremony. I reached the hidden bay by noon, giving myself time to prepare. The platform was still there, looking more decrepit than ever. I set up the offerings as instructed: native plants, water from the spring itself, objects made from materials found in the Everglades, and in the center, a stone carved with symbols that were supposedly Calusa in origin, but might have been even older. At 1 p.m., I entered the water. The dive to the chamber felt like descending into a dream, the boundaries between water and consciousness blurring. When I entered the chamber, I saw that the entity had partially emerged from its crumbling structure. The pale shape was clearly visible now, and I could finally see what it truly was. It looked like a cross between a cephalopod and something from the deep sea, with features that suggested both biological and mineral origin. Tentacles that might have been stone worn smooth by water, eyes that glowed with bioluminescence or maybe just reflected light in impossible ways. It was beautiful and terrible, ancient beyond measure. I began the ceremony at exactly 1:04 p.m., singing the words the elders had taught me. The language felt strange in my mouth, syllables that seemed to resonate with the limestone itself. As I sang, I felt the other ceremonies happening at the distant sites, felt the threads of connection weaving together into a net of memory and binding. The entity responded, not with resistance, but with something like relief. It had been trying to wake, trying to break free, but that was born of necessity rather than desire. Given a proper binding, a structure of ceremony and memory that could sustain it, it settled back into its ancient patience. I felt the presence in my mind shift, becoming less intrusive, more integrated. The weight of memory was still there, but it felt bearable now, part of me rather than something trying to consume me. The ceremony lasted exactly 17 minutes, the same number as the victims in the original bus crash, the same number that kept appearing in the cycles. When it ended, I surfaced to find the water in the hidden bay had changed. It was clearer, less dark. The oppressive atmosphere that had always hung over this place had lifted slightly. I climbed back onto the platform and called Maria on the satellite phone. Her voice was shaky but relieved. It worked. We felt it at all 7 sites. The bindings are stable. For how long? Whitfield thinks at least 20 years, maybe more. We've bought time. But Oscar, we're going to need to teach others how to do this. The knowledge can't be lost again. I looked at the black water where I'd just performed a ceremony older than civilization. Agreed, but first, I need to go home and sleep for about a week. I made it back to Flamingo just as the sun was setting on the longest day of the year. My body was exhausted, but my mind was clear in a way it hadn't been for a decade. The entity was still there in my memory, would always be there, but it felt like a partnership now rather than an invasion. Over the following months, we formalized what we'd learned. Dr. Whitfield published academic papers that carefully skirted the supernatural aspects while preserving the core knowledge. The Park Service, without ever officially acknowledging what had happened, created new protocols for reporting and investigating unusual incidents in remote areas. And a small group of rangers and researchers began training in the old ceremonies, preparing for the next cycle. But I knew, with the certainty that came from carrying an entity's memory, that this was only a temporary solution. The modern world was pushing against these ancient boundaries in ways that would eventually break them. More people, more development, more disruption of the natural systems that had held these entities for millennia. One day, probably in my lifetime, we'd face a choice. Let the entities wake and deal with the consequences, or find a new way to coexist with these ancient consciousnesses that had been here long before us and would be here long after we were gone. It's 2025 now, and I'm sitting in a small house on the edge of Everglades City, looking out at the mangroves that have defined my entire adult life. I retired from the Park Service 2 years ago, but I never left the area, couldn't leave. The entity is still with me, will always be with me. Not as a burden anymore, but as a responsibility. A promise made in dark water that I'll keep until the day I die. A lot has happened in the 12 years since that summer solstice ceremony in 2013. Dr. Whitfield published his research, carefully framed as anthropological study of indigenous environmental management practices. His work sparked renewed interest in traditional ecological knowledge, though only a handful of people understood the deeper truth behind his academic language. Maria lives in Tallahassee now, working as a consultant for the state park system. We talk every few weeks, comparing notes on unusual incidents reported at various sites across Florida. The bindings have held mostly, but there are signs of strain. Climate change is altering the aquifer, changing the flow of underground rivers. Development encroaches closer to the sacred sites each year, and the entities grow restless, pressing against their ancient constraints. The other witnesses from 2003 have lived varied lives. Haley Kravitz eventually returned to marine biology, though she focuses her research on the Pacific Ocean now, as far from the Everglades as she can get while staying near water. Tom Hopkins died in 2018, a sudden heart attack at age 42. I've always wondered if carrying those fragmented memories took a physical toll on him. Rachel Kim was found in 2015 living in a Buddhist monastery in Thailand. She'd spent 12 years in meditation, trying to process what she'd experienced. She never spoke about it publicly. But the biggest change in my life came from an unexpected direction. My daughter. Elena graduated from the University of Florida in 2016 with a degree in marine biology. Despite my attempts to steer her toward anything other than water-based sciences, she'd been drawn to the field with an almost gravitational pull. She'd inherited my love of the Everglades, but without any knowledge of what I'd experienced there. I tried to keep that knowledge from her, tried to protect her from the weight of memory I carried, but the entities have a way of calling to certain people, drawing them in, and Elena, it turned out, was one of those people. It started in the summer of 2017. She'd taken a research position with a water quality monitoring program, working throughout the 10,000 islands. One night, she called me from a motel in Everglades City, her voice shaking. "Dad, I saw something today, in the water near Lostman's River. Something that shouldn't exist." My blood went cold. "Where exactly were you?" She gave me coordinates. I didn't need to check them. I knew they were close to the hidden bay. "Elena, listen to me carefully. I need you to come here right now. There are things I need to tell you, things I should have told you years ago." She arrived an hour later. We sat on my porch, looking out at the darkening mangroves, and I told her everything. The research team in 2003, the entity in the spring, the cycles and ceremonies, the binding in 2013. I told her about the weight of carrying ancient memory, about the responsibility that came with knowing what lived beneath the limestone. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from skepticism to belief as I spoke. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "How long have you been carrying this?" she finally asked. 22 years. Since the first time I went down. And you never told Mom, never told anyone except Maria and the others involved?" I shook my head. Who would believe me? And even if they did, what good would it do? This knowledge is dangerous. The entities respond to being known. The more people who know about them, the stronger they become. But I saw it, Dad. I didn't go looking for it, but I saw it. Doesn't that mean something? I looked at my daughter, seeing my own stubbornness reflected back at me. "It means you're like me, sensitive to their presence. They recognize something in you, some quality that makes you a potential keeper of their memory. Is that why you tried to keep me away from marine biology? You were afraid this would happen? I was trying to protect you, but I realize now that might have been impossible. These entities have existed for millions of years. They're patient. If they want to be known by someone, they'll find a way." Over the following weeks, I trained Elena as Dr. Whitfield, and the elders had trained me. I taught her the ceremonies, the mental disciplines required to hold ancient memory without being consumed by it. I took her to the hidden bay and showed her the underwater chamber, the structure that contained the entity. She handled it better than I had. Maybe because she'd been prepared, or maybe because she was simply stronger. When she first encountered the entity, first felt its presence in her mind, she accepted it with a calmness that took me years to achieve. "This is what you've been carrying all this time?" she asked, after we surfaced from that first dive. "It's beautiful in a way, terrible, but beautiful." "That's exactly it," I said. That's what most people don't understand. These entities aren't evil. They're not even hostile, not really. They're just utterly other, so ancient and alien that human concepts like good and evil don't apply. They simply are, and they need to be known in order to continue being. Elena became my successor, the next keeper of the binding. She's been performing the ceremonies at the hidden bay for 8 years now, maintaining the structure, keeping the entity contained. And she's part of a growing network of people, mostly young, who are learning to manage these ancient sites. Dr. Whitfield's work has inspired a new generation of researchers who understand the real stakes. There are now 23 identified binding sites across the Southeast, and we have trained keepers at most of them. It's not a formal organization, nothing official or documented. Just a loose network of people who know the truth and have accepted the responsibility. But I worry about the future. The signs are everywhere if you know to look for them. The entities are growing more active, pushing against their bindings. Climate change is disrupting the aquifer systems, altering the precise balance of water and stone that has kept them contained for millennia. Development brings more people closer to the sacred sites, more potential witnesses who might accidentally stumble onto something they're not prepared to understand. And then there's what happened last summer, June 2023, exactly 10 years after the summer solstice ceremony. Elena was performing the routine maintenance ritual at the hidden bay when she felt something different. The entity wasn't trying to break free, wasn't aggressive or threatening. It was communicating something new. She surfaced and immediately called me. "Dad, you need to come out here. It's showing me something." A warning. I met her at the hidden bay within 2 hours. Together, we dove down to the chamber. The entity was more active than I'd seen it in years, the pale shape pulsing with bioluminescent light. When we opened our minds to its presence, the message was clear. They're waking up. Not just the 7 in Florida, not just the ones in the Southeast. All of them. Entities bound in caves and springs and deep water all across the world. The network of consciousness that I'd glimpsed in 2013 was stirring, responding to something global, something that affected all of them simultaneously. And the message was specific. The bindings will fail within a generation, maybe less. The world was changing too fast, the natural systems that supported the ancient structures breaking down too rapidly. The entities needed a new kind of binding, one suited to the modern world. "What kind of binding?" Elena asked me after we surfaced. "I don't know, but I think we're going to need to fundamentally change our relationship with them. Stop thinking of them as things to be contained and start thinking of them as partners, maybe. Ancient consciousnesses that can help us navigate a changing world if we can learn to work with them instead of just keeping them locked away." "That's terrifying," she said. "I know, but might also be our only option." Since then, I've been in contact with researchers around the world. The pattern is global. From the cenotes of Mexico to the outback of Australia, from the caves of Europe to the deep lakes of Africa, there are signs of these ancient entities stirring. Different cultures have different names for them, different mythologies built around them, but they're all part of the same phenomenon. We're at a crossroads. Within my lifetime, maybe within the next decade, we'll face a choice. Continue trying to contain these entities with ceremonies and bindings that are becoming less effective each year, or attempt something unprecedented. True communication, real partnership with consciousness that predates human civilization. I don't know which path we'll choose. I don't know if we're even capable of making that choice consciously, or if it will be forced upon us by circumstance. But I know the age of simple containment is ending. Elena asks me sometimes if I regret going down that first time in 2003, accepting the entity's memory, becoming its keeper. The honest answer is complicated. The burden has been real, the weight of carrying ancient consciousness through my daily life affecting every relationship, every decision. My marriage failed partly because of secrets I couldn't share. I've had to live with knowledge that isolates me from most of humanity. But I've also experienced something profound. I carry memories of Earth as it was millions of years ago. I understand the deep timescales that govern geology and evolution. I've touched a consciousness so vast and alien that it makes human concern seem both precious and temporary. And I've played a part in preventing catastrophe, keeping something dangerous but not inherently evil from breaking free and reshaping the world in its ancient image. My daughter will carry this burden after I'm gone. And there are others being called even now, young people who feel drawn to sacred springs and caves, who sense something waiting in the deep places of the earth. They're the next generation of keepers, though they don't know it yet. I think about the research team sometimes, the 4 people whose accidental encounter with the entity in 2003 set all of this in motion. They stumbled onto something they weren't prepared for, became witnesses without choosing to be. In a way, we're all witnesses now. The age of ignorance is ending. Whether we want to or not, humanity is going to have to acknowledge that we share this planet with consciousness far older than our own. Last week, I received a call from a park ranger in Big Cypress National Preserve. She'd been on patrol in a remote section of the preserve when she found something. An ancient platform built over a spring, just like the one in the 10,000 Islands. And on that platform, carved into wood that was slowly rotting away, were coordinates. I know what those coordinates will lead to. Another chamber, another entity, another piece of the network. And I know that someone will have to go down and become its keeper. That's how it works now. The entities are revealing themselves, making their presence known to people who can handle the truth. They know the old system is failing. They're reaching out, trying to find a new way to exist in a world that has largely forgotten them. I'll be going to Big Cypress next week to investigate. Elena is coming with me. Together, we'll dive down and meet whatever waits in that spring. We'll assess whether it needs a new keeper, whether the binding can hold. And if it can't, we'll have to figure out what comes next. I'm 63 years old now. My hair has gone gray, my joints ache in the morning, my eyes aren't as sharp as they used to be. But I'm not done yet. None of us are. The work of keeping these ancient beings contained, or learning to coexist with them, will continue long after I'm gone. Sometimes, on quiet nights like this one, I sit on my porch and look out at the mangroves. I can feel the entity in my mind, a familiar presence after 22 years. It's not sleeping anymore, none of them are. They're watching, waiting, preparing for whatever comes next. And I'm preparing too, not for an ending, but for a transition, a new phase in the relationship between humanity and the ancient consciousnesses we share this planet with. The Everglades at night are never truly silent. There's always the rustle of wind through sawgrass, the splash of a fish jumping, the distant roar of a gator. And beneath all of that, if you know how to listen, you can hear something else. A vibration in the water, a pulse in the limestone. The heartbeat of something so old it remembers when Florida was at the bottom of a prehistoric sea. That's what I've been carrying all these years. Not just memory, but awareness. The knowledge that beneath the surface of our everyday world, there are layers of consciousness and time that most people never see. We walk on limestone that was formed from ancient sea creatures. We swim in springs fed by an aquifer that was laid down millions of years ago. We live in a landscape haunted by things that were here before us and will be here long after we're gone. The question isn't whether we'll coexist with these entities. We already do, whether we know it or not. The question is whether we'll do it consciously, with understanding and respect, or whether we'll continue blindly until the ancient structures fail and something far more dangerous emerges. I'm betting on the first option. It's why I do this work, why I've spent half my life learning ceremonies and carrying impossible memories. It's why Elena does it, and Maria, and the growing network of keepers around the world. We're building something new from something ancient. A way of relating to the deep past that might help us navigate an uncertain future. It's not easy work, it's not even safe work, but it's necessary. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In a few hours, I'll drive up to Big Cypress to meet Elena. Tomorrow, we'll dive into an unexplored spring and encounter another piece of the network. We'll do what we've always done: witness, remember, bind. And maybe, just maybe, we'll take the first steps towards something new, a true partnership with the oldest consciousness on Earth. The last patrol never really ends. As long as there are sacred springs and ancient chambers, as long as there are entities waiting in the limestone, someone will need to go down and remember. Someone will need to carry that weight, that knowledge, that terrible and beautiful burden. I've been that person for 22 years. Elena will be that person after me, and there will be others after her, extending the chain of memory into a future I can't quite imagine. But I know this: whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Humanity and the ancient ones, witnesses and entities, keepers of a secret that's becoming impossible to keep. The water remembers everything, and now so do I. If you're reading this, if you've heard this story, then you're a witness too. You know now that there are places in the Everglades and across the world where reality is thinner than you think, where ancient consciousness waits in dark water, where the past and present blur together. Be careful if you visit the 10,000 islands. Stay on the marked channels. Don't follow coordinates you find carved into wood or stone. And if you hear something calling from deep water, something that promises knowledge and memory, remember this story. Some things are better left sleeping, but some things can't sleep anymore. And when they wake, when they finally emerge from their ancient prisons, we're going to need people who understand them, who carry their memory, who can stand in the space between their world and ours and help both sides navigate what comes next. That's the real work. Not containment, but communication. Not binding, but balance. It's the work of generations, and it starts with witness, with people like me, like Elena, like you, who are willing to look into the dark water and see what looks back. My name is Oscar Cook. I was a park ranger in Everglades National Park for 30 years. I've carried the memory of an ancient entity for 22 years, and I'm telling you this story because the time for secrets is ending. The entities are waking up, and when they fully emerge, we're going to need people who aren't afraid of them. People who can remember them properly. People who can help build a new relationship between humanity and the consciousness that existed before we did. Maybe that person is you. The water is waiting. The limestone holds its secrets. And in the dark springs of Florida and around the world, ancient eyes are opening. The last patrol continues, and it will continue long after I'm gone.